Welcome to the XY Advisor podcast. To join a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice, head to xyadvisor.com. Both Zurich and Onepath life insurance offerings deliver the broadest range of offerings in the market with a combined 4 distinct solutions on offer to better serve all Australians. At Zurich and Onepath, we believe in the value of advice and the professionals who provide it. This means investing in more ways to help your clients and making it easier for you to do business with us. To find out more about how we can help you and your clients, contact your Zurich and Onepath Life or Zurich Investments representative today. G'day, Clayton here from XY Advisor, interviewing today Ray from XY Advisor and a bunch of other things, but we'll get to all that. Mate, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, so you're an interesting advisor. You know, you've won a bunch of awards, this, that, and the other. But the thing that I find interesting about your view of financial advice, or the way that you got into financial advice, or your approach to financial advice, was because you were already in advice and you said to yourself, I need to do a degree, and you chose psychology. That's interesting because you're the only advisor I know that did that. And I kind of want to take the chance to actually dive into that a little bit because we've never really discussed it at length. This is the mental health series, and it's obviously that interaction between humans and money that's the focus of this series. So if it's all right with you, maybe let's start with where your career began and why you chose psychology to study to become a better advisor.
For sure, man. And I definitely would say that in my first few classes of psychology, they would look at me walking in my suit and tie going, what is he doing here? Like... Yeah. Why? Yeah. But when you think about it a bit deeper, and I think a lot of advisors are getting this now, like it makes a lot of sense, right? So the embryonic version of this was actually in the Tracer days, where the leadership team there would go to the US and learn a lot of what US advisors were doing and seek to bring that over. From that, they created the managed account service, which took a lot of what the traditional work was away from the advisor. So managed portfolios, all of these things were then outsourced out to a different business. So it freed up a lot of space. I've got this image in my mind of like a bunch of papers on an advisor's desk. You just push all of it to one side and it's just clear space because you're not the investment guy anymore. You need to think about a deeper or a different way of working with people.
I didn't realize it was to that extent. So you weren't dealing with investments at all?
No. No. Well, to qualify what I've just said, we would work with clients to make sure that the investment program was aligned to all of the things that were important to them and was aligned to what they were comfortable with. But I didn't do any trading or anything like that. That was outsourced to a managed discretionary account provider. And really my job there was just to communicate to the clients what was going on in their portfolio, but I wasn't on the tools, so to speak, there.
Interesting. Yeah, that's sort of similar to how it was at Dixon, where Ben and I met, where we were the financial planning, the SIS strategy arm of the business, and then there was an investment side of the company.
Yeah, for sure. So once you go through an initial program with somebody and you define what it is that they need from an investment portfolio, you put that to one side. We all know you shouldn't shop and change your portfolio every 2 seconds. So not set and forget from an investment manager's perspective, but it was for us from a strategic perspective. So what are you talking about? And the US advisors were having this issue 5 years before we started to have the dilemma here. And what that created was a lot of the behavioral competencies that advisors were starting to focus on. So they were financial life managers, were these advisors that would do all the numbers stuff, but actually they were working with people to lead a life that was actually true to what they believe in, and it was more akin to psychology. Less so. I think one of the things that I learned in my degree is that psychologists would traditionally there's a theory in psychology called a set point of happiness, whereby everybody has their set point, and sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're happy, but when time comes into things, you fall back to this medium point, which is just where you sit as an individual. Psychologists would traditionally work with people that had an illness or were suffering with a trauma or some sort of issue, and the psychologist was working with the individual to get them back to that set point. But psychology was actually going through quite a few changes when I started the degree as well, and that's where all the coaching discipline starts to come in. So what my understanding of what a coach does is what I learned is that they work with people that are actually at their set point already, and it's more around thriving and peak performance and seeking to get the most out of things. So it's not solving a problem, but actually trying to create, promoting.
Would you say it's trying to shift that median upwards to closer to the happiest? So, or is it the median still exists? We're just trying to spend more times on the plus side of that.
The latter,
right.
Yeah. So there was the recognition that everybody has a set point, and there's nothing that you can do about it, but you can certainly choose how long you play at that point and define your day or your life in a way that creates movement towards the thriving side of the spectrum, I guess.
Interesting. Do you ever talk about that with your clients?
Not specifically, no. I think a lot of what I've learned in my degree is baked into the way that I work with people, but I'm not, I don't think I'm as explicit. Recognizing that there's this set point thing, and as I'm getting a little bit older now, in my 30s and all this sort of stuff.
Ancient.
I know. I'm starting to feel it a bit, but I recognize that when people come to me and they have things going on in their life, that there's a lot of, I certainly have the ability to be much more empathetic than I was in my earlier days. And I would say that one of the biggest benefits of doing a psychology degree for anybody in any job is the ability to reflect and be introspective, or certainly learn a lot about myself as well. So for financial advisors, I certainly think that there's on the surface level the dilemma of, okay, well, how are you going to work with your clients? But actually, I would suggest that the benefits of it is deeper than that. It's more at a human level, such that I would encourage this stuff to be taught in schools.
Yeah, I mean, basically, financial advice, in summary, is life skills that you should have, but that our education system just avoids it, which is this life planning. It's that psychology part, and it's also the numbers, right? People don't even know how to do their own tax return. The thing that I find interesting about what you've just said in terms of coaching is taking you from where you, like the ascent up into the positive, and psychology or a psychologist is trying to take you from on the downside and getting up to that medium. First of all, I find that as a very interesting, like I love frameworks, and that explanation is a framework I think
like psychology.
So this series, this 10-part series has largely been about identifying when people are on that negative side of that medium. And then I guess in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to discover is what an advisor can do when the client is on that side, who's on the negative, because advisors play a really important role in getting the money. So I feel like advice traditionally has been, if you're mentally on that side and there for a decent amount of time and we can prove it, we'll get you money. And money,
it helps.
Yeah, money helps. Money helps. And I think that's no one else is doing that job. So we are the people for that job. However, during the course of this series, I've kind of been questioning the idea that, is that in the best interest of the client?
Yeah.
Right?
That they're being incentivized to maybe not get better and go back to work because, hey, I'm getting paid on the 15th of every month, and
exactly,
I enjoy going to the beach on Tuesday.
Yes, exactly. But let's assume for a moment now that because improvement in your overall demeanor means that you don't get paid, then you're incentivizing staying in this position, which is not good for the person as an individual. But then the advisor's in a really tricky position, because then the advisor's, what do you coach and coax the person out of that depressed position so that they get less money, free money, or is it in the best interest of the client to get them out of there? And because because the research shows, if that person stays in that position for a long amount of time, they're going to get a cascading amount of other things go wrong. Health, well-being, right? So if you're depressed for X amount of time, then your heart disease comes and you're, sitting on the couch watching Netflix all day, right? And so I find it a really interesting concept of exploring what an advisor can do, if anything, to get people back up to where they should be. Because it's almost like the advisor feels like we're doing a good job. If someone's depressed, we can go, hey, we can get you that money. Because that's the point. And I totally understand that. And I don't want that to stop, right? But at the end of the day, advisors did such a great job of that APRA had to come in and rewrite the terms and conditions of what an income policy means because we bankrupted the industry, right? So because all the insurers, no one wanted to take the first step back from, offering this little T and C because X-Plan's little tool was going to put them at the bottom of the recommendation policy, to the point where they offered so much and advisors did such a good job at claiming that APRA was like, right, no reinsurer is going to touch the industry, right? And so, like everything in life, there's balance. You go back and forth, right? But ultimately, capitalism, like if reinsurers are saying we're about to exit the country, right? Like at some point you have to re-examine what's going on. Yeah. And advisors, I will say, have done such an amazing job on that, but I feel like it's one-dimensional. And so this series has been about exploring about what else there is, and should we be dragging people up to that medium to get them back into becoming a working, contributing member of society? So putting that premise to you. Yeah. How do you respond?
I think I challenged the premise a little bit, and I'd be interested to explore the numbers in how people have behaved in the past. But I mean, even with what's going on at the moment, like things are crazy, right? Like 10 years ago, if you spoke about the idea of being able to spend every day at home and working in your underpants, and like most people would be like, that's pretty cool, right? But actually the reality is, I'm getting pretty over it. And what I had found working with, a lot of my work was with pre-retirees, 50, 60 and gearing up to retirement. And what I found was that when you remove the financial obligation to work, people ended up working probably even harder because it meant that they were able to do just the work that they enjoyed and forget, like, you just remove that pressure. So if you're on an income protection claim and you're sat at home in your underpants and you're actually better, but the premise is that there's no incentive to go back to work. My experience with working with older people that isn't in income protection, but a similar sort of environment, is that they're actually seeking ways to engage and do things and actually be a contributing member to society, because to receive a paycheck and not do anything else isn't happiness.
Sure. Yeah. Or at least for a long period of time.
Or at least for yeah. 5 weeks of holiday a year ain't bad, but exactly. Maybe not years on end. So I don't know. I'd be interested to see that if there is this tail of people who are, and I'm sure there are the exception where people are obviously taking the piss, so to speak, but I'd be interested to see if there were a lot of people who are on an income protection claim and were able to go back to work but chose not to.
Yeah, that's actually really good. I mean, I think that data by definition would be impossible, unfortunately, to get a hold of. Because literally the survey would be, are you rorting the insurance company? So,
no.
Yeah, exactly. So we spent $1 million on the research. Turns out 100% are still on claim that should be.
Yeah.
And I guess the perhaps rather than, taking a stab at what's going on, why don't we focus then on what you do, and I'll say do because undoubtedly you've come across this. What do you do when you see clients that are headed onto that negative side of their median? And do you identify that? Obviously you're not a clinical psychologist, sure, even though you have a degree in it. And so you're probably not diagnosing and, that kind of thing. But from someone who comes at advice from psychology, do you attempt to expand the role of an advisor by by helping people who are obviously, you could say, down in the dumps, whether that's situational or biological.
Yeah.
Do you see it as your role? And if you do, to what extent? And if you are doing anything, do you find that it works?
I think there's a couple of things to that. So one of the lovely things about what I've learned in psychology and what a financial advisor tries to do are very similar, because it extends to go beyond numbers and actually tries to help people do all the things that they want to do. I don't think that would be unique to any advisor hearing that. As you were asking the question, I was thinking about I don't know that I've had many people knock on my door to speak with me about a financial plan who are really, really, really struggling, but rather people who are they're more that thriving space. They're more akin to a coaching client where they're saying, okay, well, nothing's necessarily wrong, but I don't know that I'm squeezing all the juice out of every situation, and actually want to move towards that peak performance and that thrive. So I actually can't say that I've had too many people come in raw where they're struggling. And I think that's a shame. I wonder if there's an opportunity for the market to say to people who are struggling, it's okay, and I'm comfortable to help you there. There's definitely starting to see less now, though, the idea that you need to have a certain amount of money to work with an advisor. So I wonder if that cuts off a lot of the people who are on the left of that set point. Thinking to a couple of insurance claims, or where money has given us the opportunity to have a deeper conversation, I really just put it to one side and say, okay, well, if money wasn't an object, or if you were doing all of the things that you wanted to do financially, just put that to one side. Let's have another conversation. This is the work that I was doing with a lot of retirees, to say, what are you interested in? Like, what is it that you want to do? Because retirement at 55, as an example, and waking up on Monday morning with nothing to do, in what I've seen in my clients, is a miserable. It can be a miserable existence. So, what are you interested in? What do you believe in? What do you want to do? So, having those conversations with anybody who have financial capacities, I think, is an important one. But even for people who are struggling financially, putting meaning behind the numbers to say, okay, well, let's put that to one side for a second and let's have a different conversation. That's valuable. But I don't know that I'm unique in that. I think it's just that I've had the fortunate opportunity to explore the academic side. But I would suggest that there's a lot of people in the industry doing exactly that.
Yeah. I want to explore how you go about those tough conversations with your retiree clients.
Yeah.
Right? Do you have any tools, or do you have a workbook do you have a list of questions perhaps that you ask? Because the severity of the outcome of that conversation is so large.
Yeah.
That I would imagine you're not just sitting in front of someone and being like, oh, mate, how's it going? Like, what's your purpose in life? What do you want to do? Yeah, man, watch soccer. All right, cool. Now moving on to the other things. Like, I'd imagine you've got there's a lot of weight. So how do you make those conversations easier, and how do you get those answers that actually lead to actions?
Yeah, a lot of the time people, because we're not conditioned to answer these questions, and I always preface the conversation to say, I'm going to ask you a lot of difficult questions that are probably you don't have the answers for, and that's okay. Like, we can work this out. I'm not going to pin you to any of this stuff. But for a lot of pre-retirees, and I can think of a couple of examples in particular where they weren't sure what they were going to do, but what we agreed was that let's give it a crack. Let's just have a shadow retirement, so to speak. So using long service leave, taking 3 to 6 months out of the workplace, have a go and let me know what you think. And then we can have a chat on the other side of it and work out what's important to you. And that was always interesting and a challenging experience for people because, and as I say, a lot of the time they were like, I actually didn't like the fact that I wasn't doing anything. So creating an environment which mimics the decision that you're about to make to get comfortable with that. I think more recently with a lot of younger clients that I work with who are getting a mortgage for the first time, the bank says they can borrow X. And I'm saying, well, actually, I think you could probably, the numbers would suggest that Y is better. That said, why don't we just run your bank account system to say that you're paying the mortgage at X for a period of time and see how you feel after 3 months?
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's always interesting to see. I mean, sometimes people are like, yep, that's sweet. I'm happy to make the sacrifices, or no, this is stressed. This would stress me out. And you start to see that it would impact a lot of other areas beyond the money, which is, I think, a really valuable exercise for people to go through. And for retirees, I was creating that that type of thing. Let's give it a crack. Have a go for 3-6 months, and let's report back and see how you go.
You were doing trial runs of expenditure and cash flow based on decisions.
100%.
That's amazing.
Well, the idea of going into a bank branch and asking how much money you can borrow and then shopping based on that number, for me, is ludicrous, because there's no acknowledgement of what you're doing at the moment. So that, and I just have this image in my mind of like somebody who goes to the bank, they stretch themselves, they get the really big family home, nice white picket fence, they've got the dog, but then they're so bloody stressed financially that they're working extra hours, they've banked on that bonus coming in every year, and one year there's something that goes wrong and it doesn't come through, and then they get stressed, and then their partner's stressed, and like you see this stuff all the time. But if you can just have a go at it, I mean, what's the harm?
No, there's no harm. It's because I fully agree with your premise. It's just I've never heard someone actually do dry runs with. I mean, it makes so much sense now you've mentioned it. So whether they're retirees or whether they're a young family looking to buy a home, there's going to be a financial impact to those decisions. Hey, let's give that let's do that before it's locked in.
Yeah.
Mate, that's brilliant.
Thank you.
Who told you to do this?
Well, I thought about it myself because my wife and I, we recently bought a place, and I don't know, I've never had a mortgage before, and I get a sense, and I can do a spreadsheet, and I get a sense of what I can afford, but how I feel about it, very different. So we just gave it a crack for a period of time.
Mate, that's, do you talk to your clients about that? Do you say, hey, look, because a financial planner is all about pivoting as decisions, life changes so rapidly that certainly within a couple of years you need to, as we learned from Carl Richards, I should say, during the work from home tour. That was
if anyone listening to this who hasn't seen or listened to this particular presentation that Carl Richards did, absolute gold.
Yeah, totally. And then the thing that he didn't go into, but you've alluded to, is that, well, why not test before you get to that pivot? Why don't you test how you feel about that pivot before you do it? Do you say that to your clients? Do you say, hey, look, when we get to this stage, rather than diving in head first, I'm going to want to work with you through this short little phase beforehand, before you go and do it? Is that kind of the part of the conversation? Or do you only bring it up as it occurs? Or are you sort of pre-selling that environment?
No, I'm not that clever. I'm not so explicit in a lot of these areas. I just try to bake it in.
Sure.
And I get a sense like when you put together all these beautiful spreadsheets and plans for people, it's pretty alien to look at a whiteboard or look at a computer screen and be like, okay, well, there's your life. What do you reckon? Like, it says good. Do you think it's good? And like, I don't know. It's like, okay, well, that's okay. Let's just have a go for a second and see how it feels. Like that's like, so I gauge based on the people. I think I'm quite fortunate that I work with a lot of really capable people, and they're very they pick up things quite quickly. So creating a shadow environment for every single one of these people would be largely frustrating, I would say. But recognizing sometimes that people just need a little bit of help and a little bit of that assurance. It's not for me to tell them that it's the right or wrong thing to do, but to create an environment where they can work that out for themselves is akin to that psychology and coaching thing. One of the biggest things, and this is one of the biggest struggles that I had to overcome working in financial advice, because in financial advice, in my mind, it's like, okay, well, people will come to me because I'm a subject matter expert and they're there for my opinion. So I should be the advisor. I should be able to tell you what I think you should do. Coaching, totally opposite. Psychology, slightly different, but more coaching. Coaching will never, a good coach will never give you what they think, or they'll never give you an answer, but rather just ask questions and create an environment for you to figure it out for yourself. And for me, as a practicing coach, it was very frustrating because I would sit down with you, Clayton, and, as an advisor, I'd be giving you very clear views and opinions. And then I have to sit down as a coach and I'd be getting these low marks saying your approach is inconsistent with what it is to be a coach, because you're putting too much of yourself into that person, and you're leading them in a way where you're trying to create a predetermined outcome, or you're trying to reach a predetermined outcome. But coaches are actually really, really good at just exploring, and it was one. Now I bake that into my financial advice work, where I seek less to be the directive advisor of saying these are all the things that I think, but rather these are all the things that are worth considering. What do you think?
That's cool. Where'd you do this training?
The Australian College of Applied Psychology. I had the benefit of working as an advisor for a couple of psychologists. So before I embarked on the degree, I just grabbed coffee with them and asked them what they thought I should do. So financial advisor, looking at more behavioral stuff and working with people. What do you think? And they said, well, actually, a clinical psychology degree ain't going to give you what you're after. You're going to spend a lot of time understanding the constructs of a brain and statistics and a lot of the deeper side to the theory. And it's not very practical, frankly. Like, you don't actually get practical elements until much later in a psychology degree. But rather, if you look at I think, Jansen Newman, I think is the name of another college. But basically, they were leading me more towards more applied aspects. So my degree is actually applied social sciences and social psychology, as opposed to a degree in psychology. And the reason being is because the focus was more on the applied aspects, so the different areas that you can actually use.
Yeah, that's an interesting part that we, again, going back to the work from home tour that we were discussing with Michael Kitsis. And he was saying there's a lot of data and there's a lot of takeouts looking at behavioral finance, but it gives you nothing in terms of what to do about it.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so right. It's 100% right. And I was thinking in preparation for this, I was sort of looking at my old uni notes, and it's just different tools, like different ways of engaging with people, different ways of thinking. One of the really lovely things that I picked up in coaching specifically is that, because I am a pretty traditional sort of fella, right? Like spending time talking about how I'm feeling is not a comfortable. It's not where I sit, naturally. So it's kind of interesting that I was in this class, and to be honest, I was largely a skeptic in the early days. I liked finance because there is no subjective nature to it. It's 1 + 1 is 2, and that's just what it is, and let's move on. Like, you're right or you're wrong. So going to this space, running straight into this space was scared the hell out of me. But one thing that someone told me very early on in the degree, which I loved, was, well, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff here, but just take the things that are helpful and leave behind anything that's not helpful.
It's very Bruce Lee.
Yeah. Is it?
Yeah, absorb what is useful, discard which is not.
Yeah. So I did a presentation the other day on behavioral sciences, and that was just my approach. Like, I think everyone's trying a whole bunch of different things, but don't get too caught up. Like, for anyone listening to this who's interested to explore, there are great resources, but don't get too caught up. There's a lot of different views, and I think people are still trying to figure this stuff out. Just take the things that are helpful and leave behind the things that are not. On
that, what's helpful? Do you have a couple of books that people should read? Blogs? Training? Is there anything that you recommend? For example, during the series, I've learned about a mental health first aid course.
Oh yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah, I love that.
You learn basic first aid for someone's psychology. I think now that I've learned about that, I really would love to explore that a bit more. But is there anything else that advisors should look at?
In an ideal world, doing the degree that I did would be amazing. I recognize that it's certainly not a FASEA aligned degree. So
does that mean you have to do another degree?
I need to do more units. Okay. So I need to. It's a what is it called? A non-aligned or non-specific,
right?
Non-relevant degree.
Yeah, right.
I challenge that notion, FASEA, but anyway. Tools. I can't think of anything too formal. I think Kyle Richards, Michael Kitsis are amazing in this space. There's a lot of really brilliant books. Thaler. I mean, these should be relatively familiar. Thaler, Nudge. A lot of decision making. Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow is a bit of a hard read, but there's a lot of gold in that. It's really looking at people who are focused on theories of motivation and choice architecture. So how do people behave in different environments? Anything that's there. Again, take the things that are helpful and leave behind the things that are not. Cialdini is an author of a book called Influence, and there's a lot of really interesting things there where I think salespeople can take that book down a bit of a journey. But if you think of it in a financial planning context, it's just got really strong tools on how to ask really awesome questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I read Influence when because we met originally at A&P Horizons, and there was a strong sales element to that, you would say, right?
I would.
Now, we were both, I'd come from accounting, and then I'd spent a bit of time at Dixon Advisory. So I was a paraplanner for a while. And sales was something that I was just had no experience in. I'd never done.
Yeah.
And sort of learning sales at that point was, it was an experience. And so I read Influence, and I from reading that book, I put together this whole script that I wrote down using all the methods of influence, right? And I remember trialing it on the phone and just constantly getting hung up on. and I was like, okay, cool. But it was a very good experience to go through, because I thought at that stage, sales was taking someone from not knowing anything about me to coming from it's going to a meeting and then becoming a client. And I guess in its most rudimentary fashion, that was what A&P was trying to get us to do. Sales, however, I've completely changed my mind on sales now. The way that I see sales now would be using the tools of technology, social media, email, YouTube, using all of these abilities to reach an audience and share a message. That's your sales process. That's the marketing now, because of your ability to reach so many people, and for people to opt in to what it is that you're doing. You can now do the sales process is done digitally, away from the individual, and the better job that you do at, let's call it marketing, the smaller your sales pitch needs to be. In fact, the ultimate marketing would be that someone just reads or learns everything about what you do as advice online, and then puts their credit card details in by clicking a button online. Ultimately, if you had a perfect marketing process, that's what would happen. But obviously, financial advice is a bit more complicated than purchasing things online. So, but ultimately, if you can get people to believe in what your message is to a large extent, they're just coming in to meet with you just to double check, right? So the sales process now, to me, is they should know everything about you. And your goal in the sales meeting is no longer to get them to know nothing about you to becoming a client. It's now, hey, let's just make sure that what you've learned about me makes sense for you to do actively. And if it does, if those two things align, then yeah, sure. And the sales process now is really just, generally speaking, it makes sense, but now specifically speaking, does it make sense? And that's how I view the sales process. Yeah,
look, there's definitely merit to that. In psychology, there's a thing called I might get this wrong. I think it's the trans-theoretical model of behavior change, and it looks at the ways in which it looks at how people change their behaviors, which is an element of financial advisory, right? Or if you think about getting advice or the sales process, it's doing something and then paying somebody to change the behavior. And one thing that it taught me, the journey really goes through people pre-contemplate behavior change. So I think in the case of smoking, it's like, I understand that it's good to not smoke. And then they contemplate the stage 2, where it's like, I should stop smoking. And then there's preparation to say, this is how I'm going to stop smoking. Then you take action to say, okay, now I've stopped smoking. And then there's the last stage, which is maintenance. So it's staying not smoking, right? But actually, in this model, and I found this super, 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 super helpful, is that there's an actual extra stage which is now baked into the process, which is called relapse, where people fail. Mm-hmm. And they don't actually they go back to their original behavior. So I think of those stages, and I think it would be interesting for advisors to keep those stages in mind when they put together marketing messages or different ebooks or different content or podcasts or messaging, or whenever you speak with somebody, just try to recognize where they are in their behavior stage, because there are different things that you need to satisfy in order to get them to the next. And in relapse, as an example, I think it's perfectly okay, and I found it very refreshing to have a model, to look at a model that said, yep, people will continue to take action and then fall over, but actually it's okay. So all we need to do is just make sure that review frequency or the sequencing there gets them back on track sooner than later. And it's not a case of, and I found this a lot with clients where we do a lot of savings planners and those sorts of things, and where people are breaking the rules or reverting back to their behavior previously. It's not for me to say, you've done the wrong thing, Clayton. But actually, okay, no. In my psychology mind, okay, we're in relapse phase now. So what are the things that I need to talk to Clayton about to get him back to a pre-contemplation stage? And there are tools and techniques. It's around strong questioning. But I think for any advisor, just recognizing that journey in putting together marketing or working with people or building a sales cycle similar to what you were talking about before. I think technology can do a lot of the heavy lifting here. Is helpful.
I had a client many years ago come to me and say, because funnily enough, I figured out a niche that I had that was involved in finance. So people that were, I would say, high up in banks, Macquarie Bank, BT, or I looked after people who were working in finance.
Right.
And
what was that like?
It was really good.
Yeah.
Because, and in fact, if I was to start another company and to get back into financial advice, I would go even deeper.
Yeah.
Because what's really interesting about working with people that work in finance is they understand it academically, but they don't understand the interaction between the personal interaction with finance. So they can talk about billions of dollars, but when talking about the price of a cup of coffee, they're sort of there's it's a really interesting. I loved it actually. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. So I had a client. He ended up starting his own business, but he wanted my help simply for accountability. And the idea of baking in a process where you're expecting people to fail makes a lot of sense. I guess it wasn't so much an issue, but it was a foreseeable problem because I dealt a lot with cash flow. Was, okay, while we get someone to go from where their spending patterns are currently to where their spending patterns should be or most optimally be, I would bake in error and failure to begin with. So let's say we're taking care of all your bills. So your fixed costs are done, short and long-term savings are all taken care of, debt's getting paid down, and then we figured out there was a certain amount that you wanted to spend per week. So on top of all of everything else you need to think about, let's say that amount was $300, right, as an individual per week. What I would then do is I would say, okay, cool. Let's start with 400. And so I'm going to bake into this process that you're going to fail and I learned that because because it was such a huge transition from what they were doing to what they are doing now, that I would anticipate. And there was just so much work with all of my early clients about moving money around for them because they kept making the mistake, that I learned I'm just going to bake it in. And so for the first quarter, they've got an extra 25, 30%. And I would say to them at the end of the quarter, how do you feel about that? Because ultimately we want to get to this, but is it working for you now? Do you have money left over, or are you spending all of it? In which case we need to edit the plan. But I didn't have a framework for that. That was just learnt through experience. But you're saying the expectation that someone will fail, is now almost as a part of a proper plan.
Yeah, well, I think it just takes the pressure off for people, because I know for people who work with me for the first time, similar to what you're saying, we propose a pretty drastic change to behavior, and it can be uncomfortable. It's a bit of a leap, right? And just, it's a little bit taking what's helpful and forgetting what's not. It's like, if this doesn't work in a month, and I say to clients now, it's going to take 3 months before it starts to feel comfortable, and that's okay. Remove the stress or the pressure of having to nail everything right now and making sure it's 100% perfect. Let's just agree that this is a good thing to do for right now, and then for tomorrow, if it's uncomfortable, we just have a conversation. When you did the extra 25-30%, did you find that they were spending that money? I'm interested, because anchoring would suggest that, and I know I would do this, I would definitely adjust to whatever I get.
Yeah. So as you know, when you're dealing with people's cash flow, emotion's a big part of it, right? So how people respond, because it's proximity to expenditure, right? So worrying about your retirement is so far away, assuming you're dealing with someone in their 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
That it's this theoretical concept. Sure, yes, fine, let's get the most. Ultimately, all you're trying to do is get the most amount of money so that you can spend when you no longer receive an income. Fine, sure. When proximity to expenditure is very short, the increase, the emotional reaction is super high.
Are you saying I can't go to dinner tonight?
Yeah. Correct, right? So literally, yeah. So the money today is more important than money tomorrow, which is more important than money next week, which is more important than money next month. And when you're dealing with cash flow, you are dealing with the money today. And so I noticed that we would come up with this optimal plan. I would bake in the fact that they would fail. And then I would ask them 3 months in. Oh, but you know what it's like. You're speaking to the person so regularly.
Yeah.
And I'm asking here and there, but after a while we would then have a meeting and I would say, how is it going? Like, do you feel like your behavior has changed to warrant this reduction in expenditure, or should we edit the plan? And because the emotional attachment was so high, I noticed there was a dial called guilt. Guilt was an emotional dial that I had access to.
Yeah.
And so basically, let's say 300 was the goal, but we were giving them 400. And I would say, are you spending that 400? And if they said yes, they would look at me and they'd say,
sorry.
Yes. It would be like this. I'm overspending and I don't want to. And I'd say, okay, well, let's try something else. Let's now flip it up. Let's move it to say 375. But rather than paying you 375 on Thursday, what happens if we give you, I don't know, maybe 150 on Monday and then 225 on a Thursday, right? And so we're just trialing something different, right? So now we're going to pay you twice a week, different amounts. So you've still got the majority to smash on the weekend, but now your Monday is still, that you're still going to get that and you've reduced by 25%. How do you feel about that? Cool. Like that's a really good shot. So then we trial that for a handful of months. Well, how are you feeling? Or actually I'm kind of left over with a little bit of money at the end. When I'm getting to Thursday, I'm realizing I've still got maybe $30 there or something. I'm like, okay, cool. So what you're suggesting maybe is we keep the Monday and Thursday, but instead of receiving 150 on Monday, we'll only do 120. And they're like, yeah, let's give that a shot. And then each time we're sort of, when that sort of quarterly meeting would happen, they'd come in, we'd look at the big screen in the office, we'd go through the calculator, what that means here. Ultimately, they knew and I knew we were aiming for a certain figure. But I realized it would take them maybe 12 months of editing their behavior. Yeah. And my job was to give them different options of payment, regularities at different amounts, to the point where, and it was kind of cool, like everyone had a different payment plan. So payment plan receiving the money, their own payment plan, right? Yeah. So the biggest, so some people would receive money, and I'm not even kidding, every single day.
Really?
I had clients that would get paid $40 on every single, on the 5 days.
They just couldn't help themselves.
Exactly. So they knew that $40 was going to turn up. I had other clients that would want to get paid monthly because they just liked that idea of having the lump sum. Yeah. And then they sort of had a bit of control of where they wanted to spend it every day.
Some people like gaming it as well. They're like, I managed to get to the end of the month and I've still got my money.
Exactly. So I did find that really interesting. I certainly didn't have a model for that expecting a failure, but now that you mention it, I think
you were baking it in, man.
Absolutely, yeah. And trialing to get to that ultimate, and sometimes we'd get there, and sometimes we wouldn't get there. I do find that whole concept of like hacking the process in a way that makes sense for the individual to get their best outcome. And the things that I did really well in my advice was the outcomes. I was very good at getting outcomes. Like I would, and I've always said this, I'd always put my outcomes against any advisor. What I lacked, I felt, and certainly looking back, was the process on getting those outcomes. So I wasn't very good at taking people on a journey. Beyond that cash flow piece, the rest of it, I was very directive. I was very sort of...
Yeah, this is what I think.
This is what I think.
The word advisor, like this is something I've struggled with so much. And it was one of the frustrations I had back at AMP. It's like the word advisor implies that I will advise you. I'll tell you what to do.
Correct.
And I struggle with, like, call me naive, but back in AMP Horizons, I remember when I first... It was basically this circular thing of like, well, you can't lead somebody's decision. You can't put them in. You can't tell them to be investing here because you've told them that. I was like, yeah, but they asked me. It's like I'm sort of thinking about it now. I wonder if the notion of an maybe the notion of an advisor is a bit worth considering to some extent.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are moving across to financial coach, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I would think listening to this, if I was listening to it 5 years ago, is I was a real cynic or a critic of cash flow advice, because I would think that talking to somebody about spending $775 versus $150 is playing in the margins, and it's not scalable and it's not where the value is. But actually, thinking back to the psychology degree, you're not selling $25 a week. It's that behavior change. And that you can't quantify it.
It's the equivalent is getting the personal trainer at the gym.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that if you get the personal trainer, you know you're going to end up with a better result. Just do you want to pay for it? And if I think to my mates, and as we're all sort of getting older, a lot of these guys now are in a position where, they've spent their early years in their 20s kind of asking me for advice, because I was in financial planning and they didn't want to be a client. I didn't want them as a client, but they're like, Clay, what should I do? And I'm like, look, this isn't advice.
What credit card,
mate? But, and this is the kind of thing. And I had a call from one of these guys the other day and he was like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, let's look at what you've got. You're on a salary of about 180. You're maxing out your concessional contributions. You've just bought a house. You're asking me for help. I'm like, I'm not your financial planner. Like, you need to get a financial planner. And and after spending 10 minutes with him, he goes, yeah. And I remember saying, actually, for you, your personality type, I've got someone for you. But I never intro.
Okay.
I always, because I know so many financial planners, I think of the personality types and I just go, okay, you should research this person. So I get them to Google the advisor and then do their own research. And I actually tell them, don't even mention my name. Like I want you to go through the process as if you are completely foreign to them, because you should. And then if you end up becoming a client, cool. Like we can all talk about it at that point. But I don't want to lead the witness.
Yeah.
And I want you to get the perfect outcome for yourself. And I've found that to be a really good way of referring clients to advisors.
Couldn't agree more. I actually had a conversation with a friend of a friend this week. He's like, "Oh, Ray, we caught up at the wedding a couple of years back, mate. I'm keen to get my stuff sorted. What do you reckon?" And so like, cool, mate. We had a conversation. We spoke for about 30 minutes. I was like, yeah, cool. Like you definitely fit. Your problems are the problems that we solve. So that's great. I will just say that it won't be me though. So I just pass it on to another, because it's not fair. Like there's too much going on in that relationship it would be unfair on me as an advisor. And I just wouldn't want to be, you don't want to be the guy walking into a barbecue with your mates. It's like, oh, Ray, you told me to roll my money into Sun Super.
Yeah, no.
You don't want to be that.
Yeah.
But you don't want to turn them away either, because I actually want help. So, man, I'm all for that.
Yeah. So one of the, I guess if we were to get close to summarizing, two really interesting things pulled out of this conversation was, one, this idea of there's there is an expectation that the client's going to fail, and you've just now adopted that as part of the planning process. And then the other one is this idea that you've got a median point of you as an individual, how happy or sad you are. If you're going from median up, then that's coaching, and you're trying to peak performance and helping. And that really is where advice plays. If you think about it, it's always about dragging that person up from where they are. Because in order for someone to have advice, they're either got to be one of two things. They either have to have a bunch of assets, or they either have to have like a decent income, right? Because at the end of the day, sure, like a low income and low asset person probably needs advice, but what you can do for them is kind of limited. Their need for insurance is high. So sure, like insurance advice is super valuable, because if you can't pay for your own problems that go wrong, then you need someone that can, and insurance advice is super valuable in that position. But realistically, and especially with all the costs going up so much, it's either a case of like, if someone has a high income or high asset base, then they just simply should be getting advice. And the idea of taking someone into that peak performance area, I think, is a really good way of articulating it. I guess I sort of, this podcast series has largely been about where people are when they're below that median place.
Yeah.
And trying to get them
back to the set point.
Back to that set point. But advisors currently don't really have a lot of tools to do that.
Yeah.
However, it's a conversation that needed to be had, and I would like to see what happens in that space, because as an individual, it's not highly enjoyable to work with people that are in that position. But I'm sure, I have no doubt that there are people who need advice that are in that position. And actually, to be fair, there are going to be advisors that have clients who drop to that at any given stage. What is 1 in 5 people are going to have a mental health problem? So let's call it that 1 in 5 of your clients each year are going to have that event happen.
Or 1 in 5 of your clients right now.
Yeah, 1 in 5 of your clients right now is having that experience that takes them below their median place. I'd love to start getting some literature and to start getting some research around but it's kind of interesting, because advice is really just finding their feet with median upwards.
Yeah.
So now I'm sort of expanding that conversation from below to median, and we don't really have a lot there. Who knows? But if you consider that 20% of your client base at any given time are going to be experiencing that, then what we do there, I think, it will ultimately need to be included in the advice process.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, man. And there are tools that exist, specifically in the coaching space. There's a Coaching Academy Institute in Sydney. I've not worked directly with them, but they do definitely work in this space. But I think at this point, it's just a case of acknowledging that 1 in 5 of your clients are potentially, not in a great place. So when just having that front of mind, I find is helpful. I don't know the answers, but that's okay. Like we'll help each other as we go through the journey. And because we talk to people and we're so intimate when it comes to their lives, having a layer of empathy is that I think just recognizing this stuff is a big part of the battle.
Well, mate, we've been the founders of XY together for many years, and I would say probably your exposure to that psychological piece has reverberated so deeply within XY, and then thankfully we've had the chance to reverberate that further out. So you've had a big influence on advice, certainly in this country and around the world. So on top of all your awards, mate, blah, 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 blah. But look, it's been really cool to do this stuff with you for a while. So thanks for coming on as a guest. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for asking me on.